Welcome back to the Lights Out podcast, bedtime stories for boys and girls around the world. Good evening, boys and girls. Are you ready for bed? Are you all snuggled up and ready for another Lights Out bedtime story? Well, you're in for a treat tonight because we have part 4 of the wonderful story of Henry Sugar by Roald Dahl. Part 4. Our Indian had reached the bottom of our steps, and now he walked straight over to the bicycle. He said something to the boy, and the boy smiled. The Indian mounted the bicycle. The crowd made way for him. Then, lo and behold, this fellow with the blocked-up, bandaged eyes now proceeded to ride across the courtyard and straight out into the bustling, honking traffic of the street beyond. The crowd cheered louder than ever. The barefoot children ran after him, squealing and laughing. For a minute or so, we were able to keep him in sight. We saw him ride superbly down the busy street, with motor cars whizzing past him, and a bunch of children running in his wake. Then he turned a corner and was gone. "I feel quite giddy," Dr. Marshall said. "I can't bring myself to believe it." "We have to believe it," I said. "He couldn't possibly have removed the dough from under the bandages. We never let him out of our sights. And as for unsealing his eyelids, that job would take him 5 minutes with cotton wool and alcohol." "Do you know what I think?" Dr. Marshall said. "I think we have witnessed a miracle." We turned and walked slowly back into the hospital. For the rest of the day, I was kept busy with patients in the hospital, and at 6 p.m. I came off duty and drove back to my flat for a shower and a change of clothes. It was the hottest time of year in Bombay, and even after sundown the heat was like an open furnace. If you sat still in a chair and did nothing, the sweat would come seeping out of your skin. Your face would glisten with dampness all day long, and your shirt stuck to your chest. I took a long, cool shower. I drank a whiskey and soda sitting on the veranda, and only a towel around my waist. Then I put on some clean clothes. At 7:10, I was outside the Royal Palace Hall in Acacia Street. It was not much of a place. It was one of those smallish, seedy halls that can be hired inexpensively for meetings or dances. There was a fair-sized crowd of local Indians milling around outside the ticket office, and a large poster over the entrance proclaiming that the International Theatre Company was performing every night that week. It said there would be jugglers and conjurers and acrobats and sword-swallowers and fire-eaters and snake-charmers, and a one-act play entitled The Rajah and the Tiger Lady. But above all, and in by far the largest letters, it said, "Imran Khan, the miracle man who sees without his eyes." I bought a ticket and went in. The show lasted 2 hours. To my surprise, I thoroughly enjoyed it. All the performers were excellent. I liked the man who juggled with cooking utensils. He had a saucepan, a frying pan, a baking tray, a huge plate, and a casserole pot, all flying through the air at the same time. The snake charmer had a big green snake that stood almost on the tip of its tail and swayed to the music of his flute. The fire-eater ate fire, and the sword-swallower pushed a thin-pointed rapier at least 4 feet down his throat and into his stomach. At last of all, to a great fanfare of trumpets, our friend Imran Khan came on to do his act. The bandages we had put on him at the hospital had now been removed. Members of the audience were called on to the stage to blindfold him with sheets and scarves and turbans, and in the end there was so much material wrapped around his head he could hardly keep his balance. He was then given a revolver. A small boy came out and stood at the left of the stage. I recognized him as the one who had held the bicycle outside the hospital that morning. The boy placed a tin can on the top of his head and stood quite still. The audience became deathly silent as Imran Khan took aim. He fired. The bang made us all jump, and the tin can flew off the boy's head and clattered to the floor. The boy picked it up and showed the bullet hole to the audience. Everyone clapped and cheered. The boy smiled. Then the boy stood against the wooden screen, and Imran Khan threw knives all around his body, most of them going very close indeed. This was a splendid act. Not many people could have thrown knives with such accuracy, even with their eyes uncovered. But here he was, this extraordinary fellow, with his head so swathed in sheets it looked like a great snowball on a stick, and he was flicking the sharp knives into the screen within a hair's breadth of the boy's head. The boy smiled all the way through the act, and when it was over, the audience stamped its feet and screamed with excitement. Imran Khan's last act, though, not so spectacular, was even more impressive. A metal barrel was brought on stage. The audience was invited to examine it, to make sure that there were no holes. There were no holes. The barrel was then placed over Imran Khan's already bandaged head. It came down over his shoulders and as far as the elbows, pinning the upper parts of his arms to his sides. But he could still hold out his forearms and his hands. Someone put a needle in one of his hands and a length of cotton thread in the other. With no false moves, he neatly threaded the cotton through the eye of the needle. I was flabbergasted. As soon as the show was over, I made my way backstage. I found Mr. Imran Khan in a small but clean dressing room, sitting quietly on a wooden stool. The little Indian boy was unwinding the masses of scarves and sheets from around his head. "Ah," he said, "it's my friend, the doctor from the hospital. Come in, sir, come in." "I saw the show," I said. "And what did you think?" "I liked it very much. I thought you were wonderful." "Thank you," he said. "That's a high compliment." "I must congratulate your assistant as well," I said, nodding to the small boy. "He was very brave." "He cannot speak English," the Indian said, "but I will tell him what you said." He spoke rapidly to the boy in Hindustani, and the boy nodded solemnly, but said nothing. "Look," I said, "I did you a small favour this morning. Would you do me one in return? Would you consent to come out and have supper with me?" All the wrappings were off his head now. He smiled at me and said, "I think you are feeling curious, doctor. Am I not right?" "Very curious," I said. "I'd like to talk to you." Once again, I was struck by the peculiar thick matting of black hair growing on the outsides of his ears. I had not seen anything quite like it on another person. "I've never been questioned by a doctor before," he said, "but I have no objection. It would be a pleasure to have supper with you. Shall I wait in the car?" "Yes, please," he said. "I must wash my face and get out of these dirty clothes." I told him what my car looked like, and I said I would be waiting outside. He emerged 15 minutes later wearing a clean white cotton robe and the usual sandals on his bare feet, and soon the two of us were sitting comfortably in a small restaurant that I sometimes went to because it made the best curry in the city. Imran Khan drank lemonade. "I'm not a writer," I said to him. "I am a doctor. But if you will tell me your story from the beginning, if you will explain to me how you developed this magical power of being able to see without your eyes, I will write it down as faithfully as I can, and then, perhaps, I can get it published in the British Medical Journal or even in some famous magazine. And because I am a doctor, and not just some writer trying to sell a story for some money, people will be far more inclined to take me seriously. It would help you, wouldn't it, to become better known?" "It would help me very much," he said. "But why should I want to do this?" "Because I'm madly curious," I answered. "That is the only reason." Imran Khan took a mouthful of curried rice and chewed it slowly. Then he said, "Very well, my friend, I will do it." "Splendid!" I cried. let's go back to my flat as soon as we've finished eating, and then we can talk without anyone disturbing us. We finished our meal, I paid the bill, then I drove Imran Khan back to my flat. And that's the end of part 4 of The Wonderful Story of Henry Sugar by Roald Dahl, here on the Lights Out podcast. Bedtime stories for boys and girls around the world. Good night.